The third characteristics of demonic appearances is that when people do have an encounter with UFOs, okay, they not only go deeper into the occult or New Age, i.e. again, further away from God, they not only, two, go insane or become demonically possessed, as you just saw, but three, they also commit suicide. And remember, that's exactly what demons do. Their leader is Satan. He's a murderer, as we already saw, and he's been one from the beginning. But sometimes, and this is the tricky part, UFOs will also appear on the scene with a different kind of emotion. You see, they can also apparently appear on the scene, and oftentimes do, with a sense of euphoria. And this is important because people will invariably say something like this: oh, come on, don't tell me these aliens were demons. I mean, I experienced nothing but beauty and light. I felt so much love emanating from them. It was totally pleasant. It was absolutely wonderful. I mean, these are demons? I mean, come on, you're crazy. Not so. You see, the Bible says that angels, which again demons are, just of the fallen category, they can play a good cop, so-called bad cop on you and deceive you. And that's clearly what the Bible says in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, 13 through 15. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then if his servants masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. And believe it or not, these guys I'm about to show you found out the hard way just how deceptive these beings can be, including going to the extreme of playing good cop, bad cop on you, masquerading as a so-called angel of light. Let's take a look.
Mike Mandel is a Canadian entertainer and lecturer. For many years, he was involved in various aspects of the occult, including spirit mediumship. Dozens of entities would speak through him on an ongoing basis.
I became involved in what is now known as channeling in the late 1960s. It was a spontaneous experience. We had been trying astral travel and a group of other techniques to let our spirits leave our bodies, to develop clairvoyant abilities, and so on. And when I say we, I mean a small group of us that had polarized together around an occult worldview. By trying these different techniques, I inadvertently opened myself up, and various entities began speaking through me. Initially speaking in my head, and then eventually taking over to such a degree they were using my vocal cords and speaking through me to our friends.
Mike could literally be talking to you as I'm talking to you now, and instantly, in a moment, change and be taken over, and someone else would be talking. And his voice would literally stop being Mike and all of a sudden be somebody else.
Initially, it seemed to take them quite a bit of effort to take control of me. And it was more or less a voluntary thing. But as time passed, I realized that it was getting much, much easier for them to slip in and out. We used to call it someone popping in. We'd say, oh, so-and-so just popped in when you were gone. And they would appear sometimes for hours, sometimes for just a few minutes. And then we realized eventually that they were able to go in and out as they pleased by the end of things. And we asked one of the entities, someone asked on my behalf and said, why is it that you can get in and out of Mike's personality so readily? And they said something to the effect of, all human beings have a door that will keep other spirit beings out. And in most people's cases, the door is locked and barred and stapled shut and roped shut and sealed. And they said in my case, it was virtually hanging off the hinges.
They claimed to be distinctive entities. In other words, if they had a name, they would say their name. If they had a purpose or a distinctive, they would tell you that in many cases. But the range would range from what we call low-level life forms that really didn't seem to have any purpose except to be pranksters, that sort of thing, on up to through the sort of human range, right on up to what you call ascended masters, the wise, benevolent, powerful type entities, and the antithesis of that, the evil, powerful, intelligent entities as well.
They claim to be ascended masters, highly advanced spirit beings even on other planets, people on various astral planes who had reincarnated and then gone on to perfection, Tibetan Buddhists, people from the past. I mean, there was an entire realm of things that they called themselves. However, the common thread was they were all spiritually pure and were contacting our little group specifically to help us evolve spiritually.
Warder often witnessed strange occurrences. He feared the darker controlling entities, one of whom regularly threatened him with knives. Still, he was fascinated by the spirit's powers.
One evening when I was over at Mike's place, we were just sitting talking when all of a sudden one of the entities popped in and became visibly angry with, I think, primarily myself, and began ranting and raving. I can't remember the exact words he was saying, but he got up and sort of stormed off into the kitchen. My habit being to always follow Mike into the kitchen or anywhere where there were knives present. And so I just followed, but I was very concerned with what was going on. As I got to the doorway of the kitchen, Mike, quote, Mike was standing and had picked up 2 Coke bottles off the counter, 2 26-ounce Coke bottles, and held them both out in front of him and crushed them simultaneously, one in each hand. Then, unfortunately, Mike, the entity left, and Mike was not able to come back right away. And in that delay time, Mike fell forward into the broken glass, cutting his, I don't know if his hands were cut at that moment or when he actually crushed the bottles, but they were cut fairly badly. He was obviously in shock when he came back. I got him up, moved him to the couch in the living room, and again he was taken over, this time by another entity which seemed much gentler, more benevolent, and held out his hands in a very almost pathetic sort of way and said, "Do the wounds on my hands seem familiar to you?" And now we had an entity who was claiming to be or imitating Christ.
One of the things the entities used to do was they used to test us. It was as though we were being brainwashed. We'd be told to do something very bizarre immediately, or we'd be told to go at midnight to this certain forest that was very, very terrifying to us because there'd been a number of manifestations there. We'd be told to go alone there at midnight and stay there for an hour and then come home. And they were testing our readiness to respond immediately to their commands. And we were not to test them ever, because they always said proof comes to those who do not ask for it, which sounds vaguely biblical, but it isn't. And I recall one time, one of the entities was put to the test. One of the particular people in the group suddenly spoke to it in German. And the entity, without missing a beat, stopped its sentence with the other person, turned and addressed him in flawless German, and then turned back and continued the conversation. Well, none of us knew German, none of us had studied it at any time. But the entity was able to switch in and out of the other language immediately.
Emanuel Swedenborg spent an entire lifetime associating with the spirit world, yet he warned, when the spirits begin to speak with a man, he ought to beware that he believes nothing whatever from them, for they say almost anything. Things are fabricated by them and they lie. They would tell so many lies, and indeed with solemn affirmation, that a man would be astonished. If a man listens and believes, they press on, and deceive and seduce in many ways.
Well, they claim to be ascended masters, but in reality, they were the exact opposite end of the spiritual scale. There's no question in my mind now that they were demon spirits. If you had asked me then, I would have believed entirely that they were higher beings, a higher spiritual order of beings. I wouldn't have believed in demons. I didn't think they existed. I thought they were an invention of the Christian church. In retrospect now, I can see back with horrible clarity that they were malevolent, created, demonic spirits intent on our destruction.
Some of these entities out here will say, oh yeah, they're bad spirits and they're good spirits. In fact, the old mediums, before the channelers came along, it was a little more complicated. And the mediums would have a control. It was called a control spirit. And the control function, the function of the control spirit was to keep the bad spirits away and to kind of line things up, you know, and make it work out as it should. And they would even say, oh, that was a lower entity.
In my own case, I recall that some of the entities we had to deal with were overtly violent, almost psychotic. And the others were pure and altruistic, and all they wanted to do was help us, and they would warn us about things that the nasty entities were doing. and they would give us teaching and methods of developing ourselves and so on. In retrospect, I'd like to say that all the entities were equally evil. It was the clever way it was presented by showing this group as overtly evil that made us more ready to accept these guys as the good guys. In reality, they were all in it together. Whatever they say they are, Jesus Christ, Buddha, your Aunt Vera, whoever, they're not these pure, altruistic, beautiful beings that they seem to be. If you strip away the covering, you'll find a demon behind every one of these voices, behind every one of the spirits. In fact, one of their most clever ploys is to appear, as the Bible says, even Satan disguises as an angel of light. We're seeing these emissaries of evil that are dressing in the most wonderful packaging, so people are accepting them as genuine. People are seeing them as good and pure. And in reality, even the good ones are demon spirits.
Sounds to me like demons are so sneaky that they can bait you into darkness by first appearing as an angel of light, then their true colors eventually come out. Gee, I wonder where I've heard that before. Okay, and speaking of their ability to masquerade and to morph into different shapes, here's what one researcher said about this deceptive characteristics of UFOs. Let's take a look. John Ankerberg, he speaks on their morphing abilities. He says, quote, around the globe, there are tens of thousands of reported UFO entity cases, thousands involving human abduction reports. These entities range in size from just a few inches to almost 20 feet, but usually between 4 and 7 feet. They appear in forms that are human or humanoid, robot or animal-like, bizarre or ghostly. Sometimes these entities exhibit deliberate hostility towards humans, which has resulted in physical or psychological harm and even, listen, possession by the entity. Most of the time they feign an aloofness towards man, or in contactee cases a genuine concern. Sometimes, just like UFOs, these beings appear independently in three-dimensional space and time, while at other times they exist only in the experience of the observer. The morphology or form of the UFO occupants suggests ties to the Earth, not outer space. Classification of the entities corresponds broadly to creatures of historic folklore, mythology, demonology, and occultism in a wide variety of times and cultures. The fact that the UFO entities fit historic patterns of previously existing morphological types from many occultic traditions argues for their being indigenous to this planet. Both Lawson and Vallée have done interesting and important work in this field. It is significant that Lawson himself observes, quote, the devil is a polymorph and so can mimic any form imaginable or change his size at will. And folks, that's exactly what these UFO entities do, okay? And that's why many researchers, not just myself, but many researchers just flat out call them for what they are. They too believe that they're demonic. But don't take my word for it. Let's listen to the secular researchers and you tell me if they too agree what we're dealing with here. Let's take a look at their quotes. Secular researcher Jacques Vallée says that they're demons. Here's what he says, quote, we are dealing with a yet unrecognized level of consciousness independent of man, but closely linked to the Earth. I do not believe anymore that UFOs are simply the spacecraft of some race of extraterrestrial visitors. This notion is too simplistic to explain their appearance, the frequency of their manifestations through recorded history, and the structure of the information exchanged with them during contact. An impressive parallel can be made between UFO occupants and the popular conception of demons, he says. UFOs can project images or fabricated scenes designed to change our belief systems. Human belief is being, listen, controlled and conditioned. Man's concepts are being rearranged, and we may be headed towards a massive change in human attitudes towards paranormal abilities and extraterrestrial lives. In other words, they're deceiving us. Remember, that's what Jesus said, watch out for in the last days. And he goes on to say, the medical examination to which abductees are said to be subjected, often accompanied by sadistic manipulation, is reminiscent of the medieval tales of encounters with demons. The symbolic display seen by the abductees is identical to the type of initiations ritual or astral voyage that is embedded in the occult traditions of every culture. Thus, he says, The structure of abduction stories is identical to that of occult initiation rituals. Cato, he says this about UFOs being demonic in nature. He says this, he says, quote, "A large part of the available UFO literature is closely linked with the mysticism and the metaphysical. It deals with subjects like mental telepathy, automatic writing, and invisible entities, as well as phenomena like poltergeist or ghost manifestations and possession." He says many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidents that are strikingly similar to demonic possession and psychic phenomena. Guérin, he states this, he's a doctor, eminent scientist from the French National Council for Scientific Research. He has this to say. He says UFO behavior, listen, is more akin to magic than to physics as we know it. The modern UFO knots and the demons of the past are probably identical, he says. What is quite certain is that the phenomenon is active here on our planet and active here as master, i.e. they're the ones who's really controlling things behind the scenes. And even John Keel, he says this. He's one of the most informed persons in the world on UFOs, and he's the author of the now classic UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse. And here's what he stated. He said, quote, "The manifestations and occurrences described in this imposing literature of demonology are similar, listen, if not entirely identical to the UFO phenomenon itself." He says the UFO manifestations seem to be, by and large, merely minor variations of the age-old demonological phenomenon. And Mackey says this, he's a former chairman of the respected British UFO Research Association. He said this, "If one sets the three occult groups against the three classifications of UFO entities and their characteristics," he says, "it is rather surprising how complementary to each other they appear to be, not only through their appearance, activities, and level of behavior, but also in the quality of mental and especially emotional reaction and response that has been noted to have occurred on contact." In fact, Trevor James, he's a veteran researcher on UFOs. He says this, quote, listen, this is amazing, "A working knowledge of the occult science is indispensable to UFO investigation." In fact, a couple of different sociologists, Stuppel and McNeese, they said, quote, "Studies of flying saucer cults repeatedly show that they are part of a larger occult social world." And again, Keel and Vallée, Operation Trojan Horse, and Vallée in the book Messengers of Deception, both believe that the UFO entities are, and these are some of the best secular researchers on the topic, but they believe that the UFO entities are, quote, "deliberately programming their human observers with false information in order to hide their true nature and purpose." Dr. Vallée, by the way, has actually addressed the UN, the United Nations, on UFOs, and he was the model for Lacombe in Steven Spielberg's film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was based on him. And he has spent decades in serious UFO research, and like veteran UFO researcher John Keel, he has put his intellectual finger on the lowest common denominator of UFO contacts. And here it is, the word, listen, deception. Remember what Jesus said in the beginning, deception. Don't let anybody deceive you. And he also says the most common parallel to UFO phenomena is paganism and, quote, demonology. Vallée also reveals that, quote, "the UFO beings of today belong to the same class of manifestation as the occult entities that were described in the centuries past." In other words, they're demons, okay? And that's why John Ankerberg, he states this. He says, "No one can deny that even non-Christian researchers have concluded that the UFO phenomenon is an occult one. If it can be established that the world of the occult is the masterpiece of the biblical Satan and his demons, then it is logical to conclude that UFOs constitute a demonic phenomenon with a hidden agenda. After 20 years, he says, the extent and depth of our research now constitutes for us a conclusion that has become a virtual certainty that UFOs constitute a spiritistic, i.e. demonic, phenomenon. We believe that such a conclusion may affect us all."